Welcome back to Intercultural Conflict Resolution. This week I would like to try to start to introduce culture through at least one of the lenses that we use in NCRP. And for those of you who have studied mediation and actually interest-based negotiation, you have studied framing and reframing of narrative. I have actually brought a frame today just to help those of you who don't quite understand what this means think of a literal material frame, because that's exactly what it means. When we are looking at the world, experiencing the world, and interpreting the world, are using a variety of internal frames that we have created based on our social learning, how we were raised as children, what our parents taught us, what they asked us to notice, what they taught us to name. You know, all the variety of things. If you've ever raised children, you know that parents do with their children. And while they are teaching us all these frames, they are teaching us our culture. Let me read something from Holding These Truths. Many of you have used my first book in either Theories of Conflict or Ethics. And this, if you have not had a chance to work with this workbook, which is a workbook to prepare you to do multicultural dispute resolution, I would recommend its contents, its pages. I will be referencing them several times throughout this course. Perhaps if you have a colleague in the course who does have the workbook and you live close to each other, you can take turns borrowing it. Let me read from one of the pages that talks about cultural identity, social identity. And actually, I'm on page 58, and I am reading from Northrop and Thorson. As they say, identity is defined as an abiding sense of selfhood that is the core of what makes life predictable to an individual. And actually, they are about to introduce some of what happens with culture shock, which I'd also like to address briefly today. To have no ability to anticipate events is essentially to experience terror. Events which threaten to invalidate our core sense of identity will elicit defensive responses aimed at avoiding psychic and/or physical annihilation. So in our language, if we experience cultural difference, that someone does not see, experience, or frame the world in the ways that we frame and experience the world, we may experience terror if you're living in another culture for an extended period of time. Some of you have had that experience of culture shock, and I hope you will share it with each other so that those of you who have never had that experience might start to discover how deeply, how strongly our cultural identities define us. I also want to encourage all of you who have never lived in other cultures for extended periods of time to try to figure out how you might do so. You may not be able to do this during this course, but I hope you figure out a way to do so in your NCRP life career. Because really there's nothing like it for starting to open your mind and help you learn some of what you will be studying and being introduced to in this course. Now, let me talk about something that happens, when we're young, to make this very concrete for you, and then I will read another quote from Holding These Truths. I am an older sister with 4 siblings, and so when one of my younger siblings was growing up with me in an urban environment, and for those of you who do live in culturally rich, diverse environments like Los Angeles, like Southern California, you will be able to do your cultural immersions at home. You simply need to go to Japantown, Little India, Little Cambodia, and spend some extended time just noticing, feeling, experiencing, starting to try to apply what you're learning in this course. Let me take it back to my childhood, and I'm going to talk to you about my younger brother when he was very young. Actually, he did not feel terror in the face of danger. None of my younger siblings did until they were older and they had been taught by older siblings or adults what was dangerous. And so in an urban area, traffic is often a danger for young children. And none of my siblings had the fear, so they needed to be taught that you don't walk in front of a car. These are some of the basic teachings that help children also learn that in, let's say, an American culture, we are proud of the 4th of July. We celebrate with fireworks and flags. That's just sort of maybe in some minds not as an important example. For some of you, a highly important example. There are hundreds of these lessons that happen in childhood, but not every culture, actually, in my experience working with students from over 80 countries and many more cultures and colleagues as well, my experience being in a cross-cultural marriage and growing up in a multicultural family, most cultures do these things and teach these things in different ways. So there are thousands of cultural variables that we carry inside of ourselves. So let me read this other quote. Most of us, if we function well in society, automatically process all these, thousands, millions of stimuli that we experience in a day, in a week. We would call that automatic processing. So when I see a red light in the United States, I know to stop. When I see yellow, I slow down. I don't think about this. It's fairly unconscious. Okay. And this is a quote from some anthropologists who have studied cultural shock. This is not to say that automatic processing is bad or that people are lazy for relying on it. We have no choice but to rely on it, and without it, the amount of attention it would require to do any of the well-learned things we as adults take for granted would overwhelm our limited attentional capacity. We would literally be unable to get out of bed in the morning. Automatic processing frees the attentional capacity to focus on the new, the unusual, and the potentially dangerous, the most informative and the most important events going on around us at any given time. The point is not that one should try to pay attention to everything that is happening or to contemplate all of the ramifications and possible meanings of every event. Rather, the point is only that one should be aware and admit to the possibility that one might be biased without knowing it, and to take this into account when making the more important decisions. We are biased when it comes to the cultures of the world, all of us. And becoming aware of our biases is a critical piece of intercultural conflict resolution. Now, the good news is that NCRP offers several tools and practices that make all the differences with becoming aware of our implicit internal frames or biases. Each one of these is a bias when it comes to cultural difference, and learning more about another's frames and biases as we're attempting to create communication, build a relation, bridge difference. I found a wonderful quote. Stephen Covey, some of you know, became quite famous with his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He teaches leadership. And when I saw this, I thought, oh, I need to read this in intercultural conflict resolution. Because as I read his quote, you are going to hear NCRP in several lines. You will never be able to truly step inside another person, to see the world as he or she sees it, until you develop the pure desire, the strength of personal character, and I'll explain this other in a minute, and the positive emotional bank account, as well as the empathic listening skills to do it. Now, translating this into NCRP language, first of all, the positive emotional bank account is self-determination, having enough confidence as a human being that not everyone in this world needs to be exactly like you. You're comfortable with difference. You're comfortable with learning about difference. You're comfortable, going deeply with understanding another's life experience, particularly those who you might name as different than you. NCRP is implicit in everything he's saying. First of all, I will be introducing this next week. Sincere curiosity and interest in other human beings is fundamental to intercultural conflict resolution. Despite the training and development industry giving, employees of various organizations 7 bullets to help them not offend someone from another culture, life is not that simple, easy. And frankly, I'm sure some of those employees offended people from the other culture, assuming that they knew what they needed to know to do business with that other culture. We must be sincerely interested in learning more. Suspending judgment, what hopefully you have heard more than once in NCRP. If I could promote one thing to encourage intercultural conflict resolution, it would be suspending judgment, opening your mind, quieting your mind, and getting to know another person as they are in all their complexity. I don't think I need to say more about how that builds intercultural conflict resolution. Observational skills are also critically important. If you have not been introduced to process observation in NCRP or did not pick process observation in your research course, you must develop the ability to observe people as well as listen to them. Listening happens with the eyes as well as the ears. It happens with our intuitive instincts. It happens in many ways, and all are critical for intercultural conflict resolution. And then, last but not least, all you've learned about perspective taking, effective, active listening, putting yourself in another's shoes, in another life experience, helps with intercultural conflict resolution. Well, my main goal today was to introduce the frame as a way of understanding culture, and then to talk briefly about culture shock and what's involved with culture shock. I think I've done that. I welcome questions. Have a good week.